Now I'm going to get to introduce Duncan Laurie, and I have to say you guys are in for a real treat. Duncan Laurie was born in Detroit, Michigan in 1947, but he grew up spending his summers at his grandparents' magical 58-room summer cottage on an island peninsula in Rhode Island. Later, the harsh realities of real life necessitated a series of wage-earning jobs. First as a designer and manufacturer of belt buckles in Pennsylvania, later as an art teacher to juvenile delinquents, then as a traveling sandblaster, and finally as an architectural glass designer in New York City. It was there that he finally found escape from the boredom of the mechanistic world by fabricating his visions into glass paintings, writing journals on love's labors lost, and composing essays on the subject of implausible technology. When he learned that machines and electronic devices had been invented that could respond to directed human intent, the temptation to create such a device as art became overwhelming. Through the good graces of the late R.J. Reynolds III, in 1988, Laurie obtained and brought to New York City America's first immersive sonic radionic device. This is this machine you see right here. Originally called the BETAR, which is an acronym for Bioenergetic Transduction-Aided Resonance, it's based on a Buckminster-Fuller Dymaxion form. Later, after Laurie's own improvements and modifications had been performed on it, it came to be known as the PER generator. In 1988, the PER generator was already well into its life as a unique type of chopped car, but the intended transportation method was entirely cerebral. Over the years that followed, various gifted basement inventors have repeatedly torn it apart and rebuilt it to new specifications. Today, the latest version is powered by a sonic device that mimics the purr of a cat, since everyone knows that a cat's purr is the happiest sound in the known universe. After tonight's talk, you're welcome to climb inside it and try it out for yourself. Today, Duncan and his colleagues operate out of a remote structure that he made of recycled glass and architectural salvage, located on a rocky promontory of Connecticut Island on Rhode Island's Narragansett Bay. Here he also conducts an irregular gathering of artists, engineers, and musicians called the Mind Meld. Through the rest of the year, he welcomes students, researchers, and musicians to use his lab for all kinds of other explorations of the strange place where science, art, technology, and the unexplained all seem to converge. As part of the programming for Farfetch, we've asked Duncan to come to our campus this week with some of his equipment in order to work with students from physics, the Arts Village, and others, with no preconceived hard and fast ideas about what might happen. We've been very happy about how the week has gone, and now in the spirit of the Farfetch exhibition, I ask you to set aside any preconceptions, open your mind a little, and welcome Duncan Laurie. Thank you.
Well, that's going to be a lot to live down, but I want to tell you, first of all, I've had a wonderful visit here with many students from the university, and I owe this to Roger, and to Zoe, and to Matt, and all the people that work in this fine museum that made my stay here extraordinarily pleasant. But it really has been about you guys, you know, interacting with people that I've never met, whose ideas and knowledge and training I have no clue as to what you're doing. And it's doubly hard because I know you're in a very prestigious school and you're trying to learn practical skills and face the world, you know, before too long. So here we are looking at a bunch of things that are almost fanciful in their design and their construction and their operation. I was asked by a student today who came in to write a paper on this machine here. Well, he said, what was this thing? So what is this thing? You know, how would you characterize it? What did you make it for? I said, well, you know, it's like a lot of things where you have a serious topic that you want to talk about, but you know nobody's going to believe it, and nobody's going to like it, and nobody's going to feel it's even for real. So the easiest thing to do is to sort of make a parody of it, and that's what essentially I began doing with this device. It's a fun device. It's something that's made for people to get in and make a wish and enjoy the experience of hearing the CAD and having sort of an interactive experience with a piece of art. It's not supposed to be serious. It's not supposed to be something that you have deep thoughts about. It's just an enjoyable experience. But behind it is an interesting concept. The concept that led me into this field, that led me into some of the other devices you'll see in the other room and some of the things I'm going to show you tonight, is the notion that consciousness, our consciousness, can become a motive force in technology. I know this is completely non-scientific. We value objectivity in science and peer group approval and all the rigors that go with making sure things are done correctly. But in art, which is what we're doing here, we have an entirely self-referential process. We take a piece of material, a paint, canvas, clay, metal, whatever it is we want to work with, and we apply our intent to that material. We take the material at hand, we invest something of ourselves in it. We carve it away, we model it, we color it, whatever it is we do. We're actually applying something of ourselves to that material, and then we get a chance to look at it, and then we evaluate it. And based on that evaluation, we change it, we modify it. Really, the thought in mind is that if in doing this we are changing ourselves, we're going to actually put something of ourselves, take the risk to get something out into the real world, view it, have other people see it potentially, and then look at it and say, what do we want to change? What do we want to change about ourselves that we see here? Can we do that by changing the materials and the process by which we work? And this is very exciting because unlike the tasks in the real world, you're actually the subject of your own experimentation. You get a chance to look at yourself and view yourself, have other people view you, and change what you don't like, or change what you do like and make it better. It's a very different process. With that in mind, I want to talk a minute about the show that Roger and Tom have put together in the other room here. We have a lot of different, really wacko artists and inventors and visionary architects and people that have basically operating on another level entirely from what the normal experience is. What is the common denominator in this that you can see? Well, what I took away from it is that every one of these individuals, regardless of the time or the background or their culture or all the other conditions in their lives, they all were receiving some kind of bizarre signal from the universe. They were picking up something that their neighbors weren't getting on TV. You know, they were looking at things very differently. And we forget that the nature of reality, even the most respectable reality, changes all the time. We had at the end of the 19th century, the science of the day believed that the entire world could be explained in strictly mechanical terms. And yet, a few years later, really at the end of the 19th century, once they had it all wrapped up, they found quantum mechanics. Quantum mechanics is like crazier than anything you can possibly imagine in that show. It's completely undermined the existing reality, scientific reality of the day. So we don't know what's coming next. That's my point. And if this art is any indication of the future, the likelihood is that the science that we see and the art that we see is going to have a huge component of consciousness. Consciousness is really hard to deal with because how do you get away from it? You can't step back and say, well, I'm going to exclude my consciousness from this experiment. It's impossible to do. You have to embrace a completely different way of looking at the world. Instead of quantitative analysis, you're really looking more at a qualitative analysis. You're looking at things, shades of colors, and not pure expressions of black and white. So, with that kind of thinking in mind, I began sort of trying to find ways to encourage other artists to look at the kind of ideas that I was interested in. Let's call them the strange signals that are out there. And also take a look at what the potential for these things are in other forms of art that I didn't have much real expertise in. So let me go back and see how well this all works. This image here, you can see it, is this device in an earlier incarnation. Can you see that cursor on there? Yeah. So this little device, this little part of it here was the original PUR generator, and that had controls on it, so you could actually change the PUR to conform to your own expectations and desires. And all this other technology, these shortwave radios, these amplifiers, all of this stuff, and the mixing, were all sounds that could be mixed and brought into this chamber. So a person could lie in here, and maybe up top here you'd be playing the voice of a dolphin, and down here you'd be hearing the purr of the cat, and in the middle you might be hearing a John Coltrane solo, or over here a piece of short wave that's coming live, you know, from the edge of the universe. It was very, very immersive, and people would get into this thing, and they would, it was not invasive. Nobody was forced to do anything. There wasn't any application, but there was a sense that if you got into this and you wanted to, you could reimagine yourself. You could go places. You could go places in your mind. You could drift off and let the sounds take you into associations that you may have never considered before. And this seemed to happen over and over again. And this is why we consider this a sonic radionic device. A radio means essentially that there are vibrations in everything, and that if you tune into these things and you begin to look at them closely, the wall between subject and object begins to disappear. You begin to enter the reality that you hear, like you do when you listen to music or you get immersed in a beautiful painting. This is where objectivity stops. And now what takes place is things that are inside us, things from the heart. So those experiences have a different agenda. They're taking us to a different place. So I'll show you where we started doing this. I mean, I was doing this in New York before I came here, or came to Rhode Island. But this is a piece of land, part of which I inherited, and then later built this building you see in the center. And you're going to see a little later on a few images of some of the artists that came in and worked there, and still are coming to work there. But it was an extraordinary site that by itself conveyed like so much energy and so much beauty and so much presence that it was almost impossible not to have other things that were influenced by that type of beauty take place. So in that space, I had a partner that I worked with who was an electrical engineer. And thanks to this gentleman, Gordon Salisbury, he was able to design instruments for me that looked at very, very subtle signals. We had a lot of technology, strange technology like you'll see just inside the door, radionic technology that makes there's no apparent output, and yet it's used by people to heal. It's been used in other cultures, under other venues. It's used by shaman. And I first saw this take place when I was probably in my 30s. I was out on the Hopi Reservation in northern Arizona. And it had been a long, hot day, and I'd been at a dance. Essentially, it was a snake dance, but the purpose, that's where they hold the snakes and they dance around. It's like dusty and everybody's uncomfortable. But the purpose of the dance is to bring in rain. So at the end of the day, in this beautiful area, we're up on these mesas that are so high that you can see planes flying by below you where you're standing. It's a magical place. You just can't possibly describe it. But anyway, the end of the dance is over, and suddenly I see the thunderheads rolling in, right? And they're coming in fast, and within 15 minutes, it's pouring rain. This is a place that gets 6 inches of rainfall a year, total. What are the chances that it's going to rain that soon after the range ends. It's pretty slim, you see. So I was impressed, and I figured, well, you know, these are artists, they're doing a dance, it's a ritual, sure, it's a ceremony, but how is it that they're actually making rain with this? There must be a technology involved. There's no machine parts, there's no electricity, there's no fabrication to speak of, but still something is being engineered. What could that be? That's what this gentleman in this picture and I decided to pursue. We wanted to find out a little bit more about what the signals were. Is there a signal in nature that you can find with an instrument that will give you an indication of this domain of consciousness that's behind the apparent world that I'm trying to talk about here? So we made some sensors. This is actually, you have to understand, there's an element of fun to all of this constantly going on. So these bones, these skulls, are actually sensors that are made into rattles. They have a biological component in them that we use and tie into instrumentation, just like the music that you heard at the opening of the talk. That was biosensor derived electronic music. The inventor, the musicians took the signals, which I'll show you more of here and play for you again, and turned them into electronic music compositions. But it started out, this is actually a Faraday cage, which is a screen which attempts to enclose a signal so no static and other kinds of electronic contamination can get in. We wanted pure signals. We wanted to look at whatever was at the bottom of the heap in terms of what constituted our consciousness. This is the building that we did a lot of this in winter. It's changed a little bit now, but it was a great site to be working on this. It was built in sacred ratios. In the ancient world, the technology that I've been discussing was called sacred geometry. It all had to do with proportionality. The beautiful conch shell that you see is all sacred geometry. It's the way nature has told us, has given us to relate to the universe at large. It's in the design of the human body. This relationship, this length to this length is the same as this length to this length. And it's a magical ratio. So it's used in the very best design that you see. You will look at it closely, you'll find these ratios in it. So we use those. So the building itself became a device. Once we put the sacred geometry in it, it was serving as a conduit for some unknown energy. So eventually, through various experiments, this is a rock that is hooked up to a certain device, put in a double Faraday cage, blocking out all the signals. This is another rock. We had signals coming out of rocks. Many of you that were here during the week saw some of this. I set these plants up, these experiments up, some with plants, and then we had one rock. This is another one just to show you as a background. This is a carved Indian bowl. They didn't have bowls, they had to carve them out of rock. And this little object at the bottom is a birdstone, it's a fetish. So we hook these things up, put some moss in it, and look for signals that could come through the sacred objects that these ancient peoples made. So eventually we decided to get sophisticated equipment. That's what I brought to this time and was showing everybody. And I'll show you how it's a brainwave analysis, hardware-software combination. Ironically enough, the small voltages on the surface of the plant that we were looking for this mysterious signal in correspond exactly to the brainwaves of the human mind. So even rocks, certain rocks have a small electrical voltage that they give off, a petrovoltaic charge. That's the same, all in the same frequency range. So we were able to take this brainwave technology and hook it up to plants and hook it up to rocks and look for signals. So I'm going to play you, this is a a video that was a previous installation in a different art show here. So this is an ordinary piece of granite we picked up off the shore of Rhode Island. And I've hooked up a voltmeter to it in the millivolt range. That's what the clips are. You can see that there's nothing here except what you see. The IBVA is the brainwave analysis, just a more complex version of the voltmeter that allows us to graph the signals as they come along. So signals that are coming out of this rock, when the girl touches it, are producing a video graphic that you see above me here. And that graphic is a representation of her interaction with the stone, which is not only seen on the graph, but is heard audibly. Well, this is Michelle Darling, and she's a very, very fine electronic musician. And her and Terry Gola, who have a band called Aerostatic, helped me design this experience into this video. So I asked her to write the music for it. So right now, she has to touch the rock in order for it to give a signal. But there's a moment that's coming where the rock's going to take over. It's going to require no touch in order to keep moving. And that's the point where all these little signals that we were sampling from this graph right here, now the rock is doing it entirely on its own. It's generating all these little sounds that we're hearing. Now, they're sampled from this according to predetermined criteria. We're not getting every piece of information off that rock, but we're picking and choosing the peak frequencies, and then those are being used instrumentally. They're being assigned an instrument and eventually being processed as a piece of music, which you'll hear right now, where there are effects added to it. So all of this music goes right back to those tiny voltages that you saw on the voltmeter. This is one of the strange outcomes of this line of study. It actually grew and grew and grew until, we were astounded ourselves as to what it really became. So I'll just give you a minute to listen to this. What happened is we expanded the graphic, the waterfall graphic, to where you can actually go into the mountains and valleys and look at, these are all signals. Everything that's going by us here is a signal that's coming from that rock, a graphic representation. Now it's been turned upside down. And even the beats and things and the cadence of this composition are determined by the small voltages on the surface of that rock. So the question becomes, with a lot of this is, or at least for us, it became, what are these signals? Are they just mechanical, chemical? Is this pressure acting within the rock that's producing voltage? Or is there something like inside of nature that's intelligent, right? Does nature have an intelligence that, given the right circumstances, could be considered a co-creator? And we looked at this, and you'll see from the credits that we listed nature as the co-creator of this, because if the rock hadn't put out the signals, we wouldn't have had anything. You see? So this is a question. We have a potential partner here in life, and if we use it correctly, it can help us. And that's why the healing technologies that derive from these unknown processes are potentially so powerful, because they could be windows into an aspect of nature that is intelligent. So as a part of I wanted to show you, you think this doesn't appear in the science, but it's been getting in the back door in a funny way. And this is important not for everybody. It's not the creative part of this, but it is the scientific part, and it's important to return to that now and then and see where this fits. So what I looked for recently, what I found was this wonderful placebo study. If you don't know what a placebo is, it's you give somebody a pill made out of sugar, and you test it against a pill that's made out of a chemical that a drug company has designed, and you do a test. If 50 people have placebos and they all get better, and the chemical that the company's designed only 20 get better, you know you better buy the placebos, probably free. But scientists love these studies because it gives them something to compare their medicines against. Well, I found out in this study, which was done at Harvard and conducted by an acupuncturist of all things, that there were many, many conditions. For instance, in this paragraph here, he said with depression, an estimated 30 to 45% of the patients, or even more in some studies, will respond to a placebo. If you can get better, if you have sick people that you know, and you can give them nothing, and 35 to 45% of them will get better, I mean, what are we missing here? You know what I mean? There has to be some kind of technology there. There has to be some intent that the doctor is conveying through the pill that convinces the person that they're going to get better, and therefore they get better. It's a different kind of technology. It's just called a placebo. Anyway, that was my take on it. But it plays very nicely with the rest of this material. Let me find my situation again. So this whole world of artistry had an expression in a number of people's lives. And I'm just going to go through and show you, without explaining too much, I'm just going to flip through the pictures of the composers, the VJs, the DJs, and the various people that came to this studio of mine and set up their equipment and started playing with these plant and rock signals and putting them in not only to audio context but into video context. This is night in the top floor. There's a glass ceiling. It's a glass, basically a largely glass building built out of many types of salvage. Incidentally, they're going to tear this building down. If any of you are going to build something, you might want to look into it. This is David Last. He was one of the composers, the mixer of the piece you heard coming in. This is other people just working. This is the couple that worked on the video you just saw. They're projecting onto a piece of just a sheet we hung in front of the window. Here's an actual piece of DJ gear that looks a lot like a radionics device that's in the other room. There's a rubbing plate, there's dials, there's inputs and outputs. The two technologies are converging in a very strange way. You could even think of your own computer as a type of device that allows you access to a world beyond your own capacity. So this is the original PER mechanism. This little thing in the corner is the input well where we put the wish. I want to remind you that this isn't just a listening experience. You actually put your intent into this device in terms of a wish, and then you get in and push the button. The idea is if you do that, the device acts as a facilitator for the wish, for your consciousness, to allow you to get the wish that you asked for, you see? So, there's another guy, famous light artist named Benton Bainbridge. We also went out and did shows. This one happened to be in Newport, where they have a folk festival every year. We set up a big tent and invited people over, and a lot of the artists came over and performed. This was in a club in Providence. So all this stuff has a life. It's not just completely, absorbed in the small world of technology and design. It gets out into the real world. What else? Let's just go back. And I'll show you, before I wrap it up here, how this world existed in the early days. This is a 12th century radionics device called a geomantic device. It's currently on display in the British Museum in London. You see all these dials and all these dot figures here? They use this as a magical instrument to adjust the parameters of the environment. The natural forces of the environment were assigned to these dials, and therefore, when you move the dials, you change the forces that you were trying to affect. It's consciousness technology. There are moving parts, but there's no electricity. And you find this sort of technology probably back to the earliest world. The same dot forms, the oldest art that we have on the planet that anyone can see. I'm not saying it's the oldest, but it's the oldest surviving art, are huge boulders covered with dots, covered with cupules. They're actually carved into the surface. Nobody knows why the ancient people, we're talking not tens of thousands of years ago, but possibly hundreds of thousands of years ago, people made abstract art for ceremonial purposes, and they committed an enormous amount of time and resources to getting this done, even creating carving boulders the size of Volkswagen bugs in huge areas in northern parts of Australia and it's all over the world. It's in every ancient culture. Today, I'll show you this because you don't think books get burned anymore. In the 1970s, this guy named Don Gerard created a very simple radionics device. It was a book. All you had to do was read the book, and you had a couple of simple things, a magnet and a vial of water. It was so effective in terms of the healing that the authorities came to his house, seized all the books. We're not talking about somebody who had a clinic that was doing experimentation. We're talking about an author who wrote a book describing it, giving the reader workable technology. This whole book was not only seized, but destroyed, and to this day, it's very, very hard to even find a copy of it, much less get anyone to talk about it. It was entirely based on art. These little diagrams are essentially remedies. So that little dot is where you would put water or something that represented what you wanted to cure, and the design represented the cure. Right? It sounds insane, and it is. But the problem is it worked. He paid the price. And if you go into the history of radionics and some of these alternative technologies, you'll see this over and over again. So, again, as a closing image, I'll show you this strange thing. This could be in Roger's show. It's a very unusual contraption. But in reality, it's the first cyclotron. It was designed in 1830. And this was a primary component of a major technology. So you can't make the assumption that just because something looks silly or acts peculiar or has humor in it or just idiocy in it, that it doesn't potentially have the power to change your life, to change other people's lives, and to do things that are, for all intensive terms, miraculous. Thank you.
Questions or?
Oh yeah, sure. Why not? I'll put this little piece of music. Oh, there's one second. Let me think that again. If I didn't lose this, probably did. I want to play you one thing. Plants love plant substances. I'm sorry, but this is a recording I made just by accident at my home with this same equipment of a plant responding to a Bob Dylan song. Now the little stuff that you're hearing, the little notes, is the plant. electronic music on this except for a little acoustic guitar and a voice. Everything else is the plant. Sorry, I was asked to keep this low. Can I turn it up? Any questions? Go ahead.
So, like the placebo effect or the images in the paper doctor, is it the technology that exists within us, or is it like those things that are assisting us? Is it those technologies assisting us in our consciousness?
Yeah, if you look at, I wrote a book about sort of the history of some of this technology, not everything, but just the radionic side of it, which exists in the last 100 years. And the odd thing that strikes you when you look at it is that almost every inventor made something completely different. It was like art. Every guy had his own system, he had his own way of doing it. Some things were similar, some were electromagnetically based, but in this case, diagrammatic, you can't assume in any stretch of the imagination that this is anything but some way of using a form in conjunction with consciousness, maybe to make it appeal to nature intelligence or some higher power. I can't speak to that conclusively, but I would think that if there is going to be a transaction that takes place that heals another human being through an intervention of some kind, there's probably a higher power involved. You see, it's not going to be just like a human with a big ego that's going around erasing the slate of people's illnesses. You know, there's going to be some type of other agency involved, and that's been my impression. I don't know if that answers your question, adequately, but yeah. Anyone else? Yeah, go ahead.
So are the plants like the rocks? Like in the beginning of the rock video, had to have some sort of external stimuli, her touching it to make the waves and the sound. Are the plants like that as well? Like they have to have some sort of external stimuli at first, and then
it all depends. You say about plants, you want to know? Mm-hmm. Not usually. Plants are pretty. Plants have good days and bad days, like we do. They're brighter during the day and they're dimmer at night. You have to catch them at the right time. You have to catch the right plant. They're very individual. Some people will touch them and they won't respond at all. Other people will touch them and they just go crazy. There's a really unbelievable degree of personification, you might say, within the experience of working with plants. But many cases, even during this week, Becca, who worked at the desk, brought in one of her own plants. She loves plants, and we had 2 plants here that Roger bought for the exhibition. And the first one, we hooked it up; it wouldn't do anything. The second one started to show a little bit of life, but eventually the other one woke up, and it got jealous, you know. The other one was getting all the attention, so it woke up and did pretty well. It actually outperformed the initial plant in the long run. These are the 2 right here. So I think that, but the girl, Becca's plant, just came in like a bull out of the pen. Everything was on like maximum volume. The whole screen was filled. It was amazing. And then an hour and a half later, poofed out. Leaves were sagging. Everything was like, forget about it, you know? So that's the plant world with sound. Anyone else? Yeah, go ahead.
You keep using the word consciousness. Can you define that so I can kind of better understand what you mean?
What do I mean by consciousness? What do you mean when you say I? Do you think are you talking about your body? No, because your body is going to just die. Plus, where is it when you're in deep sleep? No body, right? It's not, maybe in a bed somewhere, but you wouldn't know it, right? So, what is the source of consciousness? That's what the artists look for when they do their work. They're saying, well, I want to increase my creativity. My creativity. Whose creativity, right? What's the source of the creativity? You see, there's something about what the core of consciousness is that's also the core of what we are. So as long as that consciousness gets associated with outside people and events and circumstances and then it's like a filter on the consciousness. It's actually reduced its potential scale. It's only when you go back and you disassociate from every form of sensual experience, you might say, that you begin to get a true sense of who you are. What's inside of there? Is it a thought? And you surely can't be a thought, because thoughts come and go. They have a beginning and an end. It can't be me. You know? So the question is perfect. This is the hardest question of all to answer. It's the question science won't touch. You see? So that's the question. If you look for that in your life, you'll be deeply rewarded, because there is really, ultimately, that's all you're going to be left with. So here we have it, you know, it's in front of us, played out in different ways in these different venues, but ultimately it's an internal process that we're talking about. And I can't answer it for you. My answer might be different. You see? Anyone else? Yeah?
From an artistic viewpoint, have you thought about manipulating the graphics produced by the sounds that you have in video into a static form to create basically patterns and prints, so you have like artwork kind of developed by rocks and plants? Or are you more so just like the science of the radio elements?
Well, the graphics, you saw the best of the graphics that come out of the IBVA. I mean, they're moving, but you could still them and make a print of it, but I mean, seriously, people aren't going to be able to relate to it, you know, as a static image. It's not inconceivable that other programs could be written for this that were more self-evidently had to do with the source material. But I'm not a computer graphics artist. The best stuff we got from this was when the artists, the VJ artists, took it and sent it into their algorithms that they had designed for working in clubs, and then watched how the signals from the plants manipulated their imagery and how different it was than when they did it themselves. You say that was fun. I mean, that really was a tell. But you know, the whole point of this is that it's wide open. I mean, where I'm at with this today is going to be nothing, you know, compared to the next group of people that get a hold of this and decide with the right tools and go to town. You know, that's the whole point of showing you. Take it on, you know. If you're an artist and you like this, I mean, go for it, because it's still virgin field. Anyone else? Oh yeah, go ahead.
So from my understanding, the device is a personal connection between yourself and vibrations. So does that mean that the wish you made is restricted to something happening to yourself? Or can you make a wish?
No, the device is really, it's a way of stepping out of yourself. You see, you have a wish, and like when you want something badly, oftentimes you don't get it, right? It's just something that you wanted too much, and therefore it eludes you, right? So that's why it becomes a wish in the first place, right? Because you can't get it. So how do you, if you're a musician, you want to play well. You sort of have to step out of yourself and let the music come through you and let the whole thing happen spontaneously. So the idea with this is that if you put the wish in, then you get in the machine, you've forgotten about the wish already because you're thinking about the machine, but still in the background, the machine is functioning as a way to, it's still connected to the wish because inside that cylinder is a coil. And the coil is tied into the electronics of the PER. So when you sit down and relax, boom, you've disconnected from the wish. So the wish is still going on in spite of you. So that gives, to my way of thinking, that gives the wish a little bit more like potential. You see what I mean? Anyone else? Thank you very much. It's been a pleasure.